Um, Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Terumos Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph. We are learning today Daf Samachei, and we left off on Daf Samachei Amud Aleph Mamish on top of the Amid. So first of all, we Mamish are in middle of the discussion as to why is it that the Braisa tells us that Hachoisam Parosoi Shal Chaveroi. And as we explained, aside of there being a law of muzzling anyone's animal, your own animal, if you're using someone else's animal while you are threshing, while they are working with food, there's also a self-understood obligation that if I rent your animal to thresh, the owner is, since the owner knows that I'm not allowed to muzzle the animal, so therefore part of what's coming to the owner is an animal returned with a full tank of gas, with a full stomach, because the animal will be eating the whole day. So if I muzzle the animal, aside of the love, it's almost like I rent a car. If the understanding is I have to give it back with a full tank, if I give it back with a less than a full tank, do they charge for gas? You pay, you don't know how much money. So the Chazal say that you have to pay 6 kav for a para, because 6 kav is the norm amount of food that a para will eat when it threshes for the whole day, 4 kav for a chamoyed, etc. And the problem is that we have a rule that Eino Loiko Mishalem, we're learning the sugya of Kamlei or Kimlei, that Abamine. So why is it that you're Loiko Umishalem? And the Gemara here in the Yerushalmi is of the understanding that when you muzzle the animal, not only are you violating the lav at the moment that you muzzle it, but really we view it as a continuous lav. As long as the animal remains muzzled while it's threshing, like I'll call chita v'chita on every single shiboilis that it's trampling on, you're violating. You did one maisa, but it's a continuous lav. So why are you chayiv to pay? You are constantly over the lav. You should always be exempt to pay. So the last answer that we learned is that you're right. That really, generally, hachoisam parasay shal chaveda, you'll be exempt to pay. Eloma, the Braisa speaking about a scenario where you muzzled the animal and you began to thresh chulin, so you over on the lav, but then you went from there to a pile of grain that is truma or hegdish truma. By truma and hegdish, you are allowed to muzzle. You're only chayiv to pay for that which there was no lav. Okay, that's a very limiting case of the Braisa. We're going to begin today's daf. Guys, remember all of this. Just to get the beginning, we're going to give another scenario, a very limited scenario in which the Braisa says when you're choisem parasa shel chaveroi, you're chayiv malchus and you're chayiv to pay. But the emes, generally, you won't be loika umishalom because ain't no loika umishalom. Now, from there, we're going to step back just to quickly review that we had last week, few daf, the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish called chayave malchus shoigigen. That means that if a person taka got hasra and they're going to get malchus, eino loika umishalem, that we had. Question is, what happens if a person violated the law, but for whatever reason they're not going to get malchus? As an example, they were not given hasra. In other words, halachically, we view them as being someone who didn't really know, shoigig. Now, by misa b'dei shamayim and tashlumin, everyone is of the opinion that even if the person manslaughtered in a way where they will not be chayiv misa, since if they would have done that same act b'mezid, they would have been chayiv misa, misas bezdin, then they're not chayiv in tashlumin, even though they are not going to get misa and they're not going to get tashlumin. Everyone agrees to that. Do we apply the same logic by malchus and tashlumin? Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. The words chayave malchus shoigigin. Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv l'shalim. If you're not going to actually get malchus, you got to pay. When you get malchus, you don't pay. Reish Lakish says no, that malchus is just like misa, even when you will actually not get malchus. But if the act was an act that if you would have done it b'mezid, you would have gotten malchus. Even though you did it b'shoigig, you are pater l'shalim. Chayave malchus shoigigin l'reish lakish pater l'shalim. That is what we had last week. What we're going to have today is mamash gavaldik. There are certain things we're going to touch that people are going to get confused because we have certain premises which probably are correct because we learned the sugi and the bavli, but we're going to shake some foundations. The question is, does the punishment of Kodesh exempt a person from Tashlumin. Not Misas Shamayim. And we already spoke about it last week, that really, of last week and of the Bavli, it's that Beis Din doesn't give you two punishments. But if one punishment is Masur Lashamayim, then the other punishment Beis Din will give you. If we were to repeat those words, then this whole conversation doesn't begin. Kodesh is not given by Beis Din, it's given by Shamayim. But the Gemara here is going to ask on that. Maybe, when a person violates any law for which the Chayiv Kodesh, if that same act is also Machayiv Tashlumin, they should be exempt. And really, we're going to see that this is not the halacha, but there is a minority opinion, two Tanoim, both Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana and Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, and we're going to see that each one says something a little bit different than the other, but both of them agree that when you're Chayiv Kodesh, you won't have to pay money. And from there, we're going to go into the final discussion. What will happen if someone is Chayiv Kodesh? Are they going to be exempt from Malchus? Or do we say, since they're getting Kodesh, they're exempt from Malchus? Or do we say Kodesh is given by Hashem, Malchus is given by a Beis Din, so they're going to be Chayiv Malchus? That is the question. I want to say the following: that Kodesh and Malchus, one thing is clear: if the person is actually going to get Kodesh, then Lokula Alma. One second. And from there, we're going to go into Misas, Beis Din, and Malchus. In other words, we're covering today all of the Kamles. Misas, Beis Din, and what would that mean? That if someone, prior to the person being put to death, they're going to get Malchus, the Gemara is going to clarify. No. If a person actually is Chayiv Misas, Beis Din, because there was Asra and there was Edim, no one says they're going to get Malchus. You would give them Malchus before you kill them. No one says that. Question is, if the Chayiv Misas, Beis Din, the sin is a Machayiv Misas, Beis Din, they're not getting Misas, Beis Din. Let's say there was no Hasra for Misa, but there was Hasra for Malchus. In other words, you're going to say Malchus is only for Mazid. I know that, but you have to know the details of Hasra. So a guy is going to do a sin. The Torah says don't do it. The Torah says if you'll do it, you're chayiv either Misa b'dei Shamayim or Kodesh, whichever one. We're putting these two today in the same category. And the person was not. I'm sorry, chayiv Misas Beis Din and Malchus. Like even Shabbos. What do you chayiv for Shabbos? You chayiv skila, right? You violate the Shabbos. You chayiv Misas Beis Din. What happens if the person who warned the potential Machal Shabbos, he didn't tell him you're going to get killed in Beis Din. He told him you're going to get Malchus. God says don't do it. No, it's in the case where you will actually not get Misas Beis Din, again Machloikis Rabbi Yechanan and Eish Lakish. That Rabbi Yechanan says, since you're not going to get Misas Beis Din, then you're going to get Malchus. You will get Malchus. When God says, thou shalt not do, as a rule, and you did it, lav sheyesh boy maisa, lav shaloi nitan latashlumin, lav shaloi nitak laasei, you're going to get Malchus. Rabbi Shlokish, at least he's consistent, says that even if bepoil you're not going to be getting Misas Beis Din, since it's a sin for which you're chayiv Misas Beis Din, just like it exempts you from Tashlumin, it exempts you from Malchus. And by the way, that's our understanding in the Bavli. In other words, we're going to cover today all of the cases of Kamlei, L'chaim. Now, I know we're mamash in the middle of the thread. So again, the Braisa that we had on Daf Samach Dalid, on Daf Soid, was Hachoisem Parasai Shal Chaveiroi Loika Umeshalem. In the Bavli, we learned that the reason why you're Loika Umeshalem is very simple. That the moment the renter did Meshicha, renting his fellow's animal, from that moment he's chayiv tashlumin. That's the whole different approach. It was when I rent your animal for the purpose of threshing, I'm already obligating myself to fill up your animal with food. It's like when I rent a car, imagine if the agreement would be that you rent a car when it's on empty, but you're getting a very cheap rental, but part of the payment is you give it back full tank. You're chayiv right away. You're chayiv tashlumin when you made meshicha. That's the Bavli. When are you violating the law for which you're going to get Malchus? When you muzzle the animal. That was not at the same time. So that we learned last week. When the two sins, the one that's mechayiv Malchus, the one that's mechayiv Mammon, don't happen at the same time, we don't say kam lebederabaminei. We don't say you only get one and the more serious one. It's two different acts, two different times, two different sins. Right? How amazing would that be? We get one punishment for all the sins we did in our life. Not halavai. We'll sin more. It's good. The system is good. Hashem will forgive all of us, and we should not, God forbid. But coming back over here. So that's the problem. The Yerushalmi rejects that. The Yerushalmi holds that your chayiv tashlumin, every time you prevented the animal from taking a bite, that is when you're chayiv to compensate the owner for that bite. Because when you don't eat it, what happens when I don't eat food? I'm not going to die. People can live not eating. Try it. The only thing is that your body begins to eat from the storage from Lenny's from yesterday. That's what happens. You eat, and there's a reserve. There's a whole system in the body. It's amazing. And we're talking, God created us to eat and to fast. Both.
Lenny's doesn't stay close.
No, when you eat a lot, it's about eating too much. Lenny's is so good that you overeat. And also Lenny's has very big portions. Some of the things you eat, you can't finish it. Okay, now, so now other answer is like this. Now this is, every topic today is huge, even though the main bulk is kamlei, but we're going to go off on another big shas sugya. And that's called, my friends, ein shliach ledvar aveda. Which means that if I appoint you as my agent to do an act which is a sin, even though in the reverse, sometimes there is shlichus for positive things, not always. If I have to put on tefillin, I cannot appoint you to put on tefillin on you on my behalf. It wouldn't work that way. It's a mitzvah shebegufay. But let me speak about the sin. Other than the Gemara says, other than the exception, Gemara, me'ila, yesh shlichus ledvar aveda, shlichus yad, tficho mechira. The Rambam says the only exception is me'ila. That's the famous. We just learned this, I think, 2 weeks ago. So you keep on reminding that how can the Rambam go against the Chazal? The Rambam also agrees that by tficho mechira and by shlichus yad, that means if I'm the shomer, and I ask you, I appoint you as my agent to use the item that I'm supposed to be shomer, which I'm not allowed to use. The other person uses it, I'm chayev for shlichus yad. The Rambam paskins that way, but the Rambam doesn't view this as shlichus ledvar aveda. Anyways, forget about the exceptions. The rule is ein shlich ledvar aveda. So what happened here is like this. Let's read it inside. The Charno Amar b'choisem al yedei shliach. That there, in other words, the renter, I'm the renter. Think about this, Aviv. And I'm the renter. It means I'm chayiv to pay the money. I'm obligated to pay the money. You, someone else, took the animal because I asked him to. He actually did the threshing, and the other person muzzled the animal. Who's chayiv malchus?
But you asked him to do it.
I asked him to do it. I'm my worker, but I told him, you muzzle the animal and do your work. Who's chayiv malchus? The worker, the one that did it. Because of the rule, ein shliach ledvar aveda. Who sinned? The worker. Who's chayiv in tashlumin? The renter. I rented the animal. When I rented the animal from you to thresh, included in the rental is subsumed the obligation to give it back with a full stomach. And if I don't, I'm chayiv. That's why loiko mishalim. It's a way out. Okay. Now, once we mentioned this rule, now maybe not efsher god, maybe the mishaleach is chayiv malchus. If the mishaleach would be chayiv malchus, so then he should be exempt to pay. So the Gemara here is actually bringing us one of the two sources we have in the Bavli for the rule of ein shliach ledvar aveda. And this is a pasuk. If you can look in the Torah Oira Shalom from Parshas Achrei Mois, the topic is chutei chutz. That shechting an animal, even to Hashem, outside the Makim HaMikdash, is a violation for which you're chayiv kares. And the Torah repeats something twice. And read the pasuk, Pesach oil moed lo hivi, that if you did not bring your carbon to the opening of the oil moed, to lahakriv carbon lashem, we are in the right place. Liftei Mishkan Hashem. You didn't do it there. You did it anywhere outside. So what happens, says the Torah, dam yechashev leishahu. The word dam yechashev literally means it shall be considered bloodshed. What do I mean it should be considered bloodshed? Anytime, Aviv, that I do an Aveda for which I am subjecting myself to be put to death, whether it is in the hands of a Beis Din, whether it is even Kares, that's dam yechashev. I was the one that subjected myself. But the Torah says the words, lo ishahu. The Torah could have said, dam yechashev. Leishahu. Dam shafach, and again, v'nichras or ishahu mekerav amoy. Why does the Torah say side? That one means the one who did it. Of course, the one who did it. No, that even if someone else sent him, so you might have thought that just like there is shlichus, we learn shlichus from Truma, right? The whole second chapter of Kedushin in the Bavli, there are two sources for shlichus, but sometimes even that which I have to do, if I appointed you to do it on my behalf, either you become like me, or either your action is attributed to me, but by a sin, we don't say that aside of the exception or the exceptions. So that's the source. I want you also just to know that in the Bavli, the Gemara says, how do you know ein shliach ledvar aveiro? One is the pasuk litzvidam yechashav leishahu. The ishahu is extra. Chazal tell us leishahu for the one that was makriv bachutz v'loy l'sholchov. But then there's another gavaldik. The Gemara says svara, and from here you know that something that's learned from logic is considered the doiraisa. And what's the svara? Divrei harav, divrei hatalmud, divrei mishoimim. That's, I know this expression is not only said when it comes to this topic, but that's one of the places where we say that. Just want to add on the svara, something that was hard to watch, that I saw people that are confused from, and they use this concept of svara, that since we find in the Talmud that we can learn certain dinim from svara, so therefore they feel that anything that to them is makes sense is as a din Torah. And a lot of people today in the kind of Reform Judaism, I hear drushes and they build mountains and they're making new halachas. And I think there's a group that's called Sfara, they call themselves. Makes sense. And once you go with your sense, you have no idea how far you can get Fakrachen. Okay. But in the Gemara, correct. Sometimes Chazal came ahead and they said either a pasuk or Sfara. And sometimes the Gemara says, Lama likra Sfarahu. At kedei kach. Lama likra. So that's what they say. It's a harai that a svara, it trumps a pasuk. God says don't do this and that and the other, but they say the svara is you could do it. So the svara trumps. I don't know how they strip, but they word it in a way that it's sad. It hurts you. Okay. Anyways, coming back over here. What's the over here? The over here is Chayave Malka Shoigigin. Lenny Chayave Malka Shoigigin. A person did something. Had they done it b'mezid, they would have gotten Malkus, but they didn't do it b'mezid. Lamashal, they were not given a warning the right way. Even they were giving you have to give a warning. It has to be right before you did the act. You have to tell them what sin are you violating. The person who's sinning has to respond by saying, I hear you, but I'm going to do it anyways. Only then, that's called the hasra. And two witnesses saw. And when it comes to death, they saw it at the same time. Don't ask. I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen for you to be liable in court. So what happens if you're not going to get Malkus? If you're not getting Malkus, says Rabbi Yechanan, you're going to have to pay. If it's an act for which you are also chayiv to pay. Says Reish Lakish, no. That since it's an act for which, if you did it b'mezid, you're chayiv, Malkus, you will never have to be compensating financially for that act because kam lebe der abamine, because you're chayav malchus, even though b'poyel you're not getting malchus. Okay, so now let's go back to this topic. So let's give a couple of interesting cases. I know that the girsois, like in the Yerushalmi, are not so clear, but let's get going. Shoygeg betruma umezid b'chametz. What's the punishment for eating chametz on Pesach? Who knows, Aviv? You're chayiv kares. Okay. And let me go further. What happens if you do it b'mezid, even though this will be one of the topics we're going to have today? Let's go with the premise that even though you're chayiv kares, if you did it b'mezid, you're going to get malchus. You know when you don't get malchus for violating a lav? We paskin. If the Torah gives a punishment of death, you're not going to get whipped and then be put to death. You're not chayiv misa for eating chametz on Pesach. You're chayiv kares. But God says don't eat it. So if you eat it, let's go with the premise that b'mezid you'll get malchus. Now what happens if what you ate also was truma? Chametz dika truma. What did we learn last week? What's the rule for someone who eats truma? They have to pay. Either b'mezid, they have to pay the principal. If they ate it b'shoigeg, what do they have to pay? keren and chaimish. So it's a sin for which you're chayiv. Let's go, malchus, kares, slash malchus, slash payment. So what happens now goes to the detail that they did not know it's truma. What they knew it's chametz, and they were warned not to eat chametz. Okay, you knew it's chametz, and you didn't know it's truma. Similar. What happens if you had a non-kohen who's a nazir? A nazir is not allowed to eat grape or grape products. It also happened to be that those grapes or grape product was truma, and they ate it. So they violated with one act, two sins. But they were shoygeg b'truma. Let's go with that girsa. In other words, when they were warned, you're a nazir, you're not allowed to eat a grape. They knew. They were amazed with the sin of nazirus. But they were not amazed. They were shoygeg with the eating of truma. Again, eating truma b'shoygeg is a sin for which it's machayev you money. Third, go worse. Shoygeg b'truma umezid yom kippurim. So what do you have over here? You have a person, again, what's the punishment of eating on Yom Kippur? Kares. Let me go again, questioning, maybe malchus. Let's leave that question open. Also, they happen to eat on Yom Kippur truma. They didn't know it's truma. Eating truma b'shoigig is machayev you, keren v'choimish, money. Will you get both punishments? Let me go with the premise that you're going to get malchus for each one. You're going to get malchus for eating chametz on Pesach, b'mezit. You're going to get malchus, a nazir. God says, don't eat grape. You're going to get malchus for that. And you're going to get, let's go, you're going to get malchus, b'mezit, for eating on Yom Kippur. Will you also be chayiv to pay? So the Gemara now is going back to what we learned last week before Rabbi Mana refuted it. Rabbi Mana refuted it from the rule of boyel achoisoi boigeres. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. You have to go back to last week. But before we came to a point, unlike the Bavli that says, when will you be loika umeshalem when the sins don't happen at the same time? We gave the example today of hachois and pirasha shalchaveda. According to the Bavli, the Yerushalmi had a novel idea that if there is a violation that you did at the same time, but one could have been violated without the other. As over here, a person can eat truma, b'shoigig, not on Yom Kippur. A person can eat truma that's not grapes. Or you can eat grapes that are not truma. In other words, each one of these sins they're not always bound together. So there was a svara before Rabbi Mana refuted it, that if something is armamish, two different avedas, everyone will agree, loika umeshalem. So the Gemara is repeating it. That if we were to go back to what we learned last week and to resolve the
conflict. But it's kashur ze bazeh. The avera is connected to one another.
You happen to eat on Yom Kippur, I got a truma, and you're not a kohen. But they're not inherently connected one to the other. There is an isur of making a fire on Shabbos. Fire always damages. Whether I'm damaging my property, your property, that's different. There, if I burn down your heap on Shabbos, I'll be patur to pay. Because fire destroys. You can't do one without the other. So we say that, and everyone, Tanudevei Chizkiya, whether you're chayv mis or not, b'poil mamish, since it's misas bezdin, any lav shenitin lasaras misas bezdin, you're not going to be mishalem. Here it's different. Here eating, yeah, you can eat anything. Eating doesn't have to be truma. Or I can eat truma, but not on Yom Kippur. They're completely not related. So if you're going to have that approach, nicha would mean, then I'm going to tell you that both according to Rabbi Yechanan and according to Resh Lakish, you will always be chayiv to pay. And let me go another nuance. You'll be chayiv to pay because loiko mishala. But in niftarina b'davar echad, but after the Gemara, that was in the Yerushalmi, was the question of Rav Mana. After Rav Mana refuted that, and he says that even when they could be disconnected, nevertheless, if they were connected, that's included in the sugya of kamlei b'derabamine. Now, what does Rabbi Yechanan say? Rabbi Yechanan says only when you actually get malchus, are you pater from tashlumin. If you don't get malchus, we're going now that you're not going to get malchus for that. That's what we're going right now. since you violated these great violations, b'mezid, chayiv kadis, let's go, you're not going to get malchus. If you're not chayiv malchus, that will be the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Look inside the Rashirilio. 5 lines from the top on the left. Let Rabbi Yochanan, you'll be machayiv keren v'chaimish. And let Reish Lakish, only ichashiv shnei devarim, kiven da havu shnei yisurim loikum mishalom. But the ichashiv davar echad, then loy mechayiv elo let Rabbi Meir. That's quite amazing. Okay. Now, the irony is, every time you're eating chametz, you're violating a lav. Every time you're eating chametz, the Torah says, Zar lo yerchel bay. I know that. But that we learned last week, that's the chidush of the Torah, that the lav of Zar lo yerchel bay, by truma, doesn't exempt you from the tashlumin. But that's only the lav of eating truma. But if there's a lav of not eating on Yom Kippur, so then if we're gonna reject the Shnei Devarim, this will be a classic case of when you get Malchus, if you get Malchus, no one will say you pay. If you don't get Malchus, that's the Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, that we call Chayave Malchus Shoygegin. Rabbi Yochanan says Chayav L'Shalom, and Reish Lakish says Patim L'Shalom. Okay. And now we're gonna go not to Malchus and Mishalim, not Malchus and money. All right, that's the premise. You're not loikum mishalim, even though we had last week the shita of Nasan bar Hoshaya that says you're not loika umishalim, but you're mishalim ve'eino loika. We're going, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both agree that when you get malchus, you're not mishalim. What happens if you're not getting malchus, but you're going to get kadis? Does the getting of the kadis also exempt you from paying money? Or it's all about Beis Din doesn't give two punishments. Kadis is not given by Beis Din. So it could be you're going to get kadis and you're going to have to pay. That's the question. So let's go. Tamon Tanina. We are quoting a Mishnah in Megillah. In the Bavli, it's Megillah Daf Zayin. In the Ein Bains, whoever remembers Ein Bains, and one of the Ein Bains was the Mishnah says Ein Bain Shabbos Liyam Kippurim. That the difference in consequence. There's many differences. On Shabbos you can eat. Ein Bain means if a person violated, what is the consequence? Ein Bain, Elo, Shezeh, Shabbos. If one violates Shabbos, the punishment in the Torah is Misas Beis Din, right? Skila, Bidei Adam. And Vizeh, if a person, God forbid, violates Yom Kippur, let's go, a person eats on Yom Kippur, if a person does Melacha, on the same Melacha, it's the same Yisurim Melacha. But there, you're not going to get Misas Beis Din, there the punishment is Kadis. The fact that the Mishnah says Ein Bain for consequence, the Gemara has a great inference. Ha betashlumen. Betashlumen would mean, my friends, let me go to my case on Shabbos. That's the classic case. A person on Shabbos went ahead and they burned their fellow's haystack. That's the example, Gadish. Their fellow's house. Chazal give that my haystack. If I burn your haystack, one of the 4 avos nezikin, we just learned this in the Rambam, is Eish. Whether it's this, whether it's that, okay, I have to pay. But burning on Shabbos is one of the Lamates Malachas. So the rule is, by the way, the rule is even if I'm actually not going to be put to death in Beis Din because I wasn't given Hasra, I don't have to pay. Ein Bain, which means ha betashlumin zeh shavin. Just like a person on Shabbos will be exempt, on Yom Kippur, if a person who's also not allowed to create fire burns the fellow's haystack down, they won't have to pay. Why would they not have to pay? Because they're chayiv kadis, even though there's no misas beis din. So that's the Gemara's attempt to show you that the rule of kam le b'derabamine is not only said misa, mamain, also kares and mamain. How great is that? To which the Gemara says, yes, but no. There are 2 Tanoim that agree to it, but it doesn't mean everyone agrees to it. If the other Tanoim would have been the ones that formulated this Mishnah, they wouldn't have worded it in this way that would allow you to make this inference. But let's go. Who are the Tanoim that agree to it? Now, both of them say the same thing, but they say it differently, so we're going to get into how do they differ. So Rab Nechunya, our Mishnah, is either Rab Nechunya ben Akana. The Tanei, here are his words. Rab Nechunya ben Akana Omer, he says clearly that Yom Kippurim kishabas lit tashlumin. Mamish this case, that if a person, through an act of either Chilul Shabbos, equally Chilul Yom Kippur, that act of Chilul also was mazik, normally be Machayev Mamin, they'll never have to give financial compensation. This is all the rules, that you don't get punished double in here. God does what Hashem does. You're good, Aviv. Simple. Clearly. Now, however, and again, Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya will sound the same, but there's going to be a nuance of a difference. He says something broader. He says, that those who are chayiv krisus are like those who are chayave misas bezdin. And I want you to know that he means the same thing, that just like when someone does an act for which the chayiv misas bezdin, if that same act is machayiv mamoin, they will not be obliged to pay the money. Same thing is if they did an act that's chayiv kares. Okay, now what's the difference? Why is it that Rab Nechuni ben Akana used the words Yom HaKippurim l'Shabbos l'Tashlumim? He gave a very narrow expression, which is our case. Rab Shimon ben Menasya is broader. So asks the Gemara, my beinei hoin, look inside the Pnei Moshe, second to last line, my nafkamina, I aminin the words Yom HaKippurim k'Shabbos, or if we say the words Yom HaKippurim k'chayave misas bezdin. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the nafkamina. So Rabbi Acha b'shem Rabbi Abina Amar, nara nida b'neim. Now, the din that we learned of someone being ma'anes a nara, right? What happens if she's also a nida? What's the din? One of the things we learned last week is you have to pay the 50 shekel kesef. I know there are other punishments, but let's just focus on that which the Torah writes explicitly. Person violates a nara, he's chayiv to pay 50 shekel kesef to her father. Having a relation with a nida, even if with one's own wife, it's an isur kares. What were to happen if the na'ara that he violated was a nida? I mean, that's mamash our topic. That's our question. Why would he not have to pay? Because of the rule that we're saying that what? That if you're chayiv kares, if chayave kares is like being machayiv misas bezdin, then you won't have to pay. Now, when did the Torah say that if you're ma'anas and na'ara, you're chayiv to pay the 50 shekel kesef? If the only sin was that you were ma'anas her. But if she was also a nida, so what does Rab Shimon ben Menasya say? He says the words chayave krisus k'mechayave bezdin. What are the words that Rab Nechuni ben says? Yom HaKippurim k'Shabbos, and we'll see a big nafkamina. And what will that be? And before we speak it out, Daf Samachei Omid Beis, Amar Rabbi Man, I'll give you another nafkamina. We'll speak it out in a moment. Uf achois ishtoi b'neim. So a person is chayiv kares. Chayv kares for having a relation with his wife's sister. What happens if she was a nara that he violated? So the question will be, do we say in these two cases that since the act also was an isur kares, either she's an ida or achois ishtoi, will that kares exempt him from tashlumin? So like this, al data de Rab Nechuni ben Hakana, who gave a very narrow application of Shabbos is like, what was his words again? Yom HaKippurim is like Shabbos. Like Shabbos, he dafka uses Shabbos, not chayave misas bezdin generally. Why? Shabbos never is something that will be allowed for us to violate. Shabbos is Shabbos. A woman who's a nida is only asur while she's a nida. There is not if she's a nida, but it's not like Shabbos. The words of the Yerushalmi is, Ma Shabbos ein lo heter achar isura. Yom Kippur ein lo heter achar isura. And therefore, it's not like the words of Rab Nechuni ben Akana. Even though Boyel nidas chayiv kares, but it's not as Shabbos and Yom Kippur. How is it different? V'zu or ve'elu, because also achais ishtoi is hoyel v'yesh lohen heter achar isurin. It's a lav, kares, but there is a time that it won't be usher. That same person, if she won't be a nida, when she won't be a nida, will be mutter. The achois ishtoi is much less of a window of heter, but the isur of achois ishtoi, by the way, continues even if the couple got divorced. A man who is married, right? So Yaakov was married after Matan Torah. If he would have been married to Leah, Even if he would have divorced Leah, he would not be allowed to marry Rachel. But if Leah passes away, then becomes mutter. So it's also not such a absolute. So according to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, in these cases, even though he was boiled the nida, even though he was ma'anes the nida, he was ma'anes achois ishtoi, yes, he'll be chayiv kares, but he'll also have to pay the fine. However, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, he says something much broader. Shabbos yesh b'kares, v'yom HaKippurim yesh b'kares. That's all he cares about. He doesn't speak about Shabbos and Yom Kippur, and therefore ve'elo hoyel v'yesh b'hen kares also eina mishalom. Bottom line is, if a person does something of it for which the chayiv kares and their chayiv mammon, does kares exempt them from paying only according to these two tanoim? That's what the Gemara is basically saying. Only according to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana and Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, which means the other tanoim don't agree with that. I stam mishnah ein bein Rabbeinu Hakadosh, just from memory. If you remember, I forgot how many ein beins, 8 ein beins over there in Megillah. The whole end of the first chapter was, ein bein. It began with whether you're celebrating on the 14th or on the 15th. That's how it began. But we went through many other ein beins. Okay.
We say Shabbos, what happens? Whatever is forbidden becomes mutter as soon as Shabbos is over, as soon as Yom Kippur is over.
If you can look at Shabbos, if you can look at Zman as a thing, whenever you are in Shabbos, you can't break Shabbos. And if you look at the woman, this woman, we don't look at as her status of Nida as a thing. This woman, can you not boil her? Depends if she's in Nida or not. Is it an Isur Kodesh? Okay.
And there's another way. You could say that as long as she's ever in Nida, you can't.
That's what Rabbi Mendel was asking.
Yeah, I know.
So that's really what the Gemara is saying, not to look at it that way. That's the whole var. To know how to look at things. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi boying. Let's go on. The guys look inside. Lavin ukiresus ma omrin ba ilain tanoi. Look inside the Rasha Ilio. This is important. How he learns the Gemara, 3 lines from the top on the right column. We're going back to these two Tanoim, Rab Shimon ben Menasya, right? You see it? But Rab Nechunya ben Akanya. That we just said chayav ekrisus is like misas bezin litashlumin. Now that we established that, according to them, next question. What happens if a person does a sin for which they're going to be chayiv malchus? What's the question? Do we say the chayeche de gabe misas bezdin leke malchus, not malchus and tashlumin? What's the question of if kares and malchus? Can we say since you're chayiv kares, you're not going to get malchus? Gavaldik. Just like anything that was given to misas bezdin, you don't get malchus. Like we just mentioned, lav shenitein la'azoras misas bezdin ein loiken olav, even if you don't get it. So now again, the question is, what do we say regarding a love? In other words, what's the question? Listen, Aviv. Does kares exempt malchus? It's very simple. But make no mistake, we are only asking this question according to whom? According to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akanya. Why are we asking according to them? Because now that we know that what does kares do? Kares exempts you from tashlumin. Because if kares doesn't even exempt you from tashlumin, we wouldn't have this question. Kares is given by God. But now, according to the Tanoim that say if you're chayiv kares, you don't have to pay, that's a big statement. If a person burns down someone else's house on Shabbos, they won't have to pay for the damage. And not on Shabbos, on Yom Kippur. Even though for Yom Kippur there's no misas bezdin, will kares exempt you from malchus? So Amar Rabbi Yosi, this was a great discussion. And Tzricha l'Rabbanan, that's the way it's worded there. Yeah, the Chachamim needed to really debate this. And now, what was their conclusion? Before we come to their conclusion, the Gemara is challenging the need to debate this. That's a need to debate? Amar Rabbi Yoino, what's the kasha? V'lama l'shama lama hado. Why didn't they automatically not know it from the following statement to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai? What's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai? We're calling this the Braisa because we're going to come back to this soon. And the Braisa is quoting Rabbi Tarfon. And there it says, these are words in the Braisa, that Nemar Kares b'Shabbos. The Nemar Kares v'Yom HaKippurim. Ma Kares Omer b'Shabbos ein Makois Eitzel Kares. Ein Makois Eitzel Kares. What does that mean, my friends? That means that if a person, I want to give you the case that the Bryce is talking about, if a person was warned that if a person was warned that you're chayiv skila, you're going to get skila. There's nothing to talk about. No one says you're going to be chayiv malchus. But if you were not warned that you're going to get skila, but you were warned you're doing a sin for which you're chayiv kodesh, that's what the person knows of. So they did it b'mezid, knowing they're going to get kodesh. So says Rabbi Tarfin that as a given, you're not going to get malchus. It's a given. If you were warned, I just needed to explain what I explained, because for Shabbos, really, you chayiv misa. So it has to be, they're talking about a scenario where you're not going to get misa because the guy didn't warn you that you're going to be put to death by stoning. But for whatever reason, the warner told him, you're doing the sin, you're machal Shabbos, you're chayiv kodesh. Just like it's a vadai that they're not going to get malchus. That's the problem. You see over here that if it's chayiv kodesh, you're exempt from malchus. Af kodesh, Kippurim. Also, ein malchus eitzel kodesh. Notes, don't tell me, Rabbi Mendel, that Shabbos you're not going to get malchus because you could have gotten misas beis din. We said that logic by Tashlumin. Rabbi Tarfon doesn't word it that way. He wants to make it clear. It's clear that whenever you're doing a sin for which you're chayiv kodesh, you will not get malchus. So why did they find it? What was the big question over here? We equated a kodesh is like misas beis din. Very simple. By misas beis din, we learned you don't have to actually get it. Any lav sheyesh by kodesh, basically, you're not going to get malchus. So Amar Rav Manukum Rabbi Yosei that I'll tell you, Matzri Cholei, Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazei said that we have to. He was the one that asked the question, and the Chachamim says, "Ooh, that's a good question." I want you to clarify. He was only asking this question according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and that's why it was a great question. And that question has to be debated. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're right. According to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no question, which is im malchus eitzel misa yeshloi. We're going to see clearly that according to Rabbi Yochanan, when a person does a sin for which the chayiv misa, not that they're getting it, they're not going to get misa because whatever, there's no witnesses. Rabbi Yochanan says that since it's a sin for which you're chayiv misa, Rabbi Yochanan says if you're not getting death, you're going to get malchus. There is malchus with misa. Since Rabbi Yochanan holds that is like kol shchein, that if you're getting kodesh, you should get malchus.
How can Rabbi Yochanan paskin this way? Based on what?
We paskin that way. Hold your thought. Let's read more words. You have to get every single kamlei. Since Rabbi Yochanan says that a sin for which you're chayiv misas beis din. If I'm chayiv misas beis din for Chilul Shabbos, Yakir, everyone holds I don't have to pay. I don't have to pay. Rabbi Yochanan says fine, but you know what? If I'm not going to get misas beis din, and I did it b'mezid, I'm going to get malchus. Am I chayiv kodesh? Yes, I am. And I'm going to get malchus. However, the ispalgun is like kol shchein makas eitzel kodesh. That when a person is going to be chayiv kodesh, they're going to get malchus. The ispalgun, where does Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish disagree regarding the scenario of hashoichet oisev es benoi l'shum avodah zarah? So you're not allowed to shech the mother and the son on the same day, Aviv. What happens if the violation happens when you shech the son or the son and the mother, whichever one? So when the second animal was slaughtered, l'shem avodah zarah. Shechting something l'shem avodah zarah is a sin for which, by the way, when you chayv skila and kodesh. Shechting oisev es benoi in itself is machayev malchus. That's where they argued. Rabbi Yochanan says only a misra boy l'shum oisev es benoi. If you gave that hasra, then you'll be chayiv malchus. And 1 second, why not skila? Because you weren't warned for skila. If you were warned l'shum avodah zarah, if you get skila, then you don't get malchus. Clearly. However, Rav Lakish says, "Afilu hisra by l'shum oisev es benoi." Just like Reish Lakish says, Chayavi Malkish Shoyagin, you're putted from paying. Reish Lakish has the same logic that even if you're not going to actually be put to death, skila, you're not going to get Malkis. Ein aloikem. Ma'achar she'ilu hisru boy l'shem avodah zarah hoya niskol. Therefore, you're not going to get Malkis. So just to make it clear, when you're getting Misas based in, no one holds you get Malkis. But when you're not getting it, will that exempt you from Malkis or not? So that's the machloikas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan. And therefore, when did they have in the Gemara this question? What was our question that he says, ooh, that's a great question? The question is, if you're Chayiv Kares, according to Rab Shimon ben Menasya, if you're Chayiv Kares, you'll be exempt from Malkis. According to Rabbi Yechanan, for sure you won't be exempt. You'll get Malkis. That's the for sure. Why for sure? Because if you do a sin for which you're Chayiv Skila, but you're not getting Skila, you're not going to get Malkis. No, forget. If you're not going to get Skila, Rabbi Yechanan, you're going to get Malkis, then you're going to get Malkis. That's what he's saying. Karev and Malkis, you're going to get Malkis. But according to Reish Lakish, it's like something to think about. Because since Reish Lakish says, if you're Chayiv Misas Bezdin, whether you'll get it or not, you are exempt from Malkis, do we now apply the same thing by Kares? Do we say, since it's a sin that bears Kares, are you automatically exempted of? So Amalei, I want you to know, not only, I'll tell you even more, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, I will still argue that there's a makom to say that if you do a sin for which you're chayiv kares, maybe not, you're going to get malkes. We brought this case of Oisav Esbenoi, which is where they argue over there, you are able to violate one without the other. Shnei Devarim. Oisav Esbenoi is one type of sin. Shechting the Shum Avodah Zarah is another type of sin. Separate sins. So what does Rabbi Yechanan say? That if you're not getting skila, you're going to get malchus. Because it's two different sins. But over here, anytime God says, thou shalt not do something, and you're chayiv kares, many lavin are lavin sheyesh by kares. It's one aveda. And therefore, maybe even Rabbi Yechanan will be moida. Maybe. That was why we asked. Maybe when you're going to be chayiv kares, you're going to be exempt from malchus. We'll stop over here. That's the Gemara's question. Even according to Rabbi Yechanan, Givaldik. So we're working.
Why Misa from Beis Din?
Yes.
You're not getting the punishment. You should get the malchus. By Kares, you're getting the punishment.
So to answer the Gabai's question, if Kamle means that Beis Din doesn't give two punishments, Kares is not given by Beis Din. The words are, I said it, this is from Rab Chaim, is Kamle b'derabim, meaning that one sin is subsumed in the other sin, or is one punishment subsumed in the other punishment. And if it's not, and if it's subsumed in the other punishment, you can argue it's only said when Beis Din gives the punishment. Or it's as if you didn't sin. A sin that is kares is not a sin of a lav. Or no, Beis Din doesn't give two punishments. Beis Din is giving you nothing. God is